Hey there, I'm Tyler and welcome back to the channel. I'm in the kitchen right now where we have this picture of the Holy Family hanging over our kitchen table. It used to be in a round frame, so we need to figure out how to make this round picture fit in a square frame, and this is what we did. You might ask yourself, Tyler, why don't you make a round frame to fit the round picture? Now, it would be fun, and I'll probably do that someday, but we have this kind of farmhouse half-lap architecture in the downstairs of the house already, so we wanted to make sure that we kind of had some symmetry. Speaking of symmetry, we're using spalted maple for this frame, which matches the table, matches the benches, and matches the stools that are all in the kitchen, which have all come out of the shop. First thing we did was break down some of that spalted maple at the miter saw, and then we're moving over to the jointer where we're going to square up two sides of that. So we're going to get one of the flat sides and one of the small edges, and then we'll go and make them parallel on the planer, which is right next to the jointer in what I call the milling section of the shop. Also notice that we're jumping back in time a little bit. I filmed this video a little over a year ago, and we are using the trusty old Delta table saw. Not as powerful as the Harvey, but it still does the job. So I got all of the maple for this picture frame milled to the dimensions that I want. I let it sit, it is stabilized, and I got my measurements right here, and we're going to chop it down to our final length on the miter saw using the stop block. And then we will come over here on the table saw where I got a dado stack installed, and we will do the dados so we can do a half lap butt joint like you see right here. This is for a different project that I didn't end up using butt joints on, and I'll show you how we go about getting those nice and snug. This is a beautiful half lap joint right here. So let's get everything cut to length and then we'll move over to the table saw. Plus 5 is 18, plus 2 is 20. This frame is going into our kitchen where it's farmhouse style table and stuff in there. So I want to do what we consider a farmhouse style kitchen frame, and that's going to be a half lap butt joint like this. That's going to be dadoed so it will sit flush and it will have a 1-inch overhang on both sides, something like this right here. So what I'm going to do with the dado is I'm going to run all the boards through with a 1-inch gap set against the fence in the blade, and then we will use our work pieces themselves to mark from that gap to where we need the other side of the blade to be, and then we will adjust the fence and we will do that second dado, and that's going to give us 2 grooves in the boards, 2 dados in the boards, something right over here, something like this but with the wood in the middle here. And at that point we can fine-tune that adjustment, make sure we got a perfectly snug fit, and because of doing this inside or edge cut first, we can then hog out all of the material without moving the fence again, and we should have perfect dados every time. Just ran a couple of quick test pieces to make sure we are perfectly flush when I pinch that together, and we are looking fabulous. Now we're going to use the actual workpiece, the actual cross member we're going to use, butt it up against that dado we just cut, and with a sharp pencil mark where your dado cut needs to go. So we need to remove all of this material, and when we line up the blade here, we're going to line it up against the outer tooth, and then we will move the fence butt up against this. Now you can't just use a workpiece to space things out because you got to take into account the thickness of your blade, and this is always the easiest way that I have found to do it. Now I would recommend you take less material, so make sure you leave this line here when you cut your dado, because you can always take more off, but you can't put anything back into your workpiece. And once you have this set one time, this should be the same for every one of those dado cuts and half lap joints you need to make. You will notice that I'm using a big sacrificial board against the miter gauge of the table saw, which holds everything nice and square. Now, why am I using that big board and not cutting all the way through? It's for two things. I want to make sure we minimize the blowout on the exiting of the blade, and also by not cutting all the way through, it helps redirect the big mess that happens when hogging out this material down into the table saw, where the dust collection can safely remove it and store it for us to get it out of the shop. We now have all of our joints cut, and before we glue anything up, we want to make sure that we get a little bit of a crispy edge. We can do most of that with a small roundover bit, but on the insides here, we actually need to use a hand plane to make sure we get a little bit of that roundover in there. And why do I need to use the hand plane? Because the router bit will scrape against the bottom and not give us that minimal roundover. So you can see right here, even the plane is rubbing up against that half lap edge. Once we got all our roundovers done, it's time for a little bit of glue and to fasten this thing permanently in place using some clamps, and obviously making sure we are nice and square. We need to cut a rabbet in the back of this frame to accept the glass and the picture. So I'm going to be doing that over on the router table with a rabbeting bit. And then you can use a chisel to square up these corners, or a multi-tool like I'm using right here. And now for how we made a square frame work for a round picture. Now I'm doing that by adding a couple of pieces into the corners to cover what would have been the empty space. Very, very sharp angles, and I cut them very carefully on the table saw using the miter gauge. Use the table saw because the miter saw, without having a square and other jigs in there, would not allow you to cut these very sharp corners. Adding the roundovers on these corner sections as well, so that we have a uniform chamfer all the way around every board in this picture frame. To fasten them in place, I am using some CA glue with activator to quickly bond everything together, but also adding some wood glue for that permanent fixture. A quick sand to make sure we have a beautiful final product, working my way all the way up from 120 to 220 grits, making sure you clean off in between and not rushing, because this is a point where you can absolutely ruin your project if you try to rush things along. For the finish on here, we are going to be going to my all-time favorite tried and true general finishes. We're going to do a coat or two of sanding sealer with a 1.3mm tip on the Fuji spray system, and then we will go and finalize the finish with 3 coats of general finishes in Duro clear poly and a semi-gloss with the 1mm tip on a Fuji spray systems spray gun. I am spraying in the shop. You can see very little overspray because I'm spraying at a slightly lower pressure right now. And I'm spraying in the shop because it's very cold outside in the winter when I made this build, and I didn't want to heat up the whole shop for an hour or so of spray finishing. So I made sure we had the dust collector on, the filters running in the shop, and tried to minimize spray as much as I can. piece of glass. One piece of glass. See if we can do this. We need about 13 7/8. 30 7/8. And this is 36 by 18. See what we can do. Making sure I very carefully lay out the cuts on this glass, because you literally only got one shot, and then I have to go back and buy another piece of glass. Now, this is a rectangle, not too difficult. You guys have seen me in the past purchase glass pre-cut for various different shapes. I had that corner cut mirror that I did back in the day, and in the end, for a piece of glass that big, a mirrored glass, it was cheaper to go to a professional to have that cut and then just fit it into the frame perfectly. Now, I was successful with this, barely, but still might be better to try to get it cut by a professional, because I actually caused it to crack at one point, but I was able to cover it up, as you can see later in the video. I think I got a crack. Actually, we probably cut that off. So I did have a little crack right here, but it turns out it's covered up by our corner, or almost covered up by our corner. So I think we're okay, thankfully. Gonna make sure the inside is nice and cleaned up, and we've got to put a little bit of, I think, velvet in here. I think it's called velvet, felt, something like that. Now, if you look very closely here, you can see a little bit of a gap between the picture and the frame. Now, to make it look really nice, I'm going to take some of this felt and cut it with the safe cut ruler from FastCap, link to that down in the description below, and then I can just tape that over the edge to make sure you don't really notice it unless you look very closely at the picture. Yes, I have tape here, and that's how I'm going to install this in here. I don't really want to do nails because I only have a little bit of room, and I don't want to risk breaking the glass or splitting the wood. So, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, it doesn't fall out. T-Rex tape, so pretty sticky stuff. I'm going to use two flat sawtooth hangers here because I want this to sit flat against the wall and not have a cable that could allow it to kind of bounce around. And we want to make sure that we're down a little bit so that we have plenty of meat for those nails to hold on to. Alrighty, round picture, oval picture in the rectangular frame. Looks pretty good. If you look super close here, you can see where I came so close to cracking that glass and making it pretty much unusable for that picture frame. Now, this is maple in the kitchen with the maple table, maple benches, maple all over in the kitchen, and it does look pretty white right now, but it will yellow up a little bit as it sits out here with the UV rays coming in and whatnot. That was a pretty fun little project. I do like half lap joints like that. This farmhouse style with the overhang looks pretty good. We have it in the bathroom down on this level of the house as well. Hope you guys enjoyed that video and it helped some of you out. If it did, please hammer that thumbs up button. It helps us out and gets this video in front of more eyes. I'm DIY Tyler. You guys have a good one.